Okay. So welcome everybody to this panel, the Pacific Alliance, Leading Integration in Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm sure many of you know that the Pacific Alliance is just 6 years old. And it was the outgrowth of 4 countries, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile, really looking at, in many ways, more the policy affinity that they had than the common geography. A policy affinity that was represented in the belief in free markets, free capital, and democracy. And they decided to pursue a deeper integration in goods, services, capital, and people, grounded in the pragmatic application of previous trade and integration agreements that had not worked. And I think the best example of that pragmatism was the fact that the Pacific Alliance was announced with 3 pages of paper, certainly not the norm for trade agreements. In those 6 years, a lot has been accomplished. The tariffs on 92% of goods have been eliminated. Many visa requirements have been eliminated, creating a greater flow of people. Education opportunities integrated amongst the countries. The capital markets, the stock exchanges of the 4 countries having been integrated. And the opening of joint international trade missions, to pick a few. But these are 4 ambitious countries, not willing to rest simply on those accomplishments. There's an even bigger agenda. And of course, when you go deeper in integration, it's the harder things that come next. Against that backdrop, we are fortunate to have with us here today a panel of the 4 ambassadors from the 4 countries to the United States. And we will jump right in with questions for the ambassadors. And let me start with Ambassador Pinzón. Why don't you talk to us about what has been the Pacific Alliance's key successes and its real value to the region itself?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity of being here at the Milken Institute conference. You know, I think for everybody, when you come here and see there's so many events going on, there's so many relevant discussions happening, we must feel proud to be included into that discussion. To find that the Pacific Alliance have a role not only for our countries, but also in a global perspective, it's very important to us, and that makes us very happy. Also, it's great to be here with my colleagues. You know, my colleague ambassadors, all of them very bright people, very well regarded, with very high honors in their lives. I will not present each of them, but I feel very, very honored, and in a very humble way, I say thank you for allowing me to be part of this wonderful group. Now, Pacific Alliance, I think you mentioned that very well. That was at some point a very wise approach, in the sense of instead of seeking regional or geographic commons, there was more a seeking of values in a way. And then we found that the fact of believing in democracy, the fact of believing in freedom, the fact of having shared concepts on how to implement and market economy oriented concept was the right thing to do. And I believe that has allowed this to be an interesting process. Instead of being an agreement that is being enforced to countries, it's more a process of harmonization of policies. And here's what I think is the big difference, the big opportunity, and what has made this alliance an innovation into what has been done in the past. Most of integrations are happening as a consequence of a supranational agreement, as the one we see in Europe, that immediately creates institutions and somehow enforces certain obligations and limits to the countries. Here is not. Here is the finding of shared elements is moving to harmonization. And that harmonization, of course, opens opportunities. One, an intra-regional discussion from capital markets to trade to other different kind of policies, from education, from moving of persons, etc., but also presenting these countries as, frankly speaking, the 8th world economy when you add them in terms of GDP. It's a market that when we, each of us look alone, well, all of our markets are interesting, and all of them have been successful in a way. But when we present ourselves integrated, it's almost 230 million people, which makes a very interesting market, you know, of about 41% of foreign direct investment that comes to Latin America is coming to these 4 countries. So just to mention some general features and why we think this is a very interesting approach and a very high potential approach, by the way.
No, and I think that also goes to part of what lies behind this is this lack of big institutions and a great deal of flexibility and agility so that the alliance can move quickly. And that's a really important, I think, point in the success as well. Well, let me move to Ambassador Pareja. So we live in a world where there's been a huge amount of discussion, particularly in Europe and the US, about trade and the negatives of trade and the losers in trade. But I think from the perspective of the Pacific Alliance countries, you would say that there are more winners than losers, and trade becomes a way to be more inclusive. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think that the purpose of the Pacific Alliance was trade, and these 4 countries, you know, had similar economic policies, for sometimes similar criteria of economic development. Of course, all are very clearly democratic countries, so that is also the essence of the Pacific Alliance. And now the conscious that the world now lives in blocks, economic blocks. The strength is to belong to an economic bloc, and so these countries, these 4 countries that had similar economic policies and trading policies, and as I say, the framework was the democracy and free press and separation of powers, decided that due to the stagnation of the economy at that time, and also due to distinctive policies in other countries of Latin America, and some of them very important countries, which these 4 countries should made an effort and create this Pacific Alliance, and I think it has been a great success due to now, and especially because now we deal with the Asia Pacific countries, and that it has been very important to be a bloc. And also, I think it has this integration between the 4 countries has helped us a lot to develop better policies, to integrate among ourselves, and to be very creative and quick, you know, in order to not lose stamina. So I think, and of course that has favored the people. We are now, for instance, in the case of Peru, we have a great agriculture development in the north of Peru, and that and due to tariffs and to negotiations among the Pacific Alliance with other countries, we have been able to develop our commerce. So we are in trade. We are very proud of the Alliance Pacific, and what we want is to strengthen it. You know, we have 92% of our commerce free now of tariffs, and the other 8% is due to be free of tariffs in the medium future.
So, you know, it's interesting that you talk about agriculture, because we've got some good examples of the integration of the 4 economies into global value chains by virtue of being together, right? We've got Chilean berries going to Mexico and then from there to China, because those are the only direct flights to China. We've got Peruvian batteries going north to Mexican cars, which are then imported to the United States. And one of the important things that data has told us is that for every 10% increase in integration into global value chains, you get almost a 2% increase in productivity. So I think that this is, another example of how this strengthens all four economies. Let me turn to Ambassador Valdés. So Chile has been very busy with the recent hosting of the meeting of the TPP signatories plus China, South Korea, and Colombia, the meeting amongst the Mercosur countries, the virtual meeting of the presidents of the Pacific Alliance countries. It's been a busy couple of months. But all of that goes to the growth of the Pacific Alliance and what is that path and why is that path moving in that direction. I think that's a pretty important part of the future. Why don't you talk about that a bit?
Thank you very much. I would also like to thank the opportunity of being here, and particularly the opportunity that the Milken Institute is giving to a discussion on Latin America. I was just listening to Secretary Mnuchin, and the questions had to do with the East and with the West, but Latin America was perfectly absent. And it's curious because if you think the United States has more trade with Latin America, even if when one excludes Mexico, than with India. And the United States has more investments in Latin America than in India. However, I am assured that if you look at the way in which some people conceive discussions on trade and development in the world, they will look at India obsessively, with all due respect to our friends in India, and they simply discard our part of the world which is extremely active and alive in terms of economic development and investment attraction. It is true, Chile has been extremely active, and I would like to add two things to what has already been said. I fully agree with the idea that the Pacific Alliance is a result of our association and mutual perception of the importance of trade, open trade, democracy, human rights, a free economy, the role of the private sector, etc. But it is also true that what impelled us was the fact that the four countries had a trade agreement with the United States. And second, two of these countries had trade agreements with China. And the four countries had agreements with the European Union. And third, we are all located in a way in which the impact of the development of China and the Eastern countries is extremely noticeable and important to our economies. Therefore, we participated very actively in the negotiations of the TPP, with the exception of Colombia, that should not have been an exception and should have participated. This is what all Latin Americans participating in TPP wanted. We participated during more than 5 or 6 or 7 years in this effort. And we still believe that this is a very remarkable and important effort because it introduces us in 21st century trade, and it gives us high standards that are absolutely necessary in the Asia-Pacific region and in the region, in our own region, in new areas which are extremely important for the world economy. Therefore, what we did, having the presidency of the Pacific Alliance for the time, was to invite all members of the TPP, including, of course, the United States, plus Colombia, China, and South Korea, to a meeting on the 14th and 15th of March to discuss what do we do. Not only with the expansion of the Pacific Alliance, which is essential to us, but also with the TPP, and also with other proposals that have come from Asian countries or from China of different sort of associations in the area Pacific region. And we believe that that meeting was extremely useful and good, because first of all, it reiterated that discussing and exchanging views on world trade at this moment is critical to all of us, particularly to countries in our part of the world. Second, we expressed a trust, a belief that free trade is the only way in which we can make progress in the international sphere. That multilateral agreements are essential to have stability in world trade, and that therefore we want to sustain the possibilities of associating ourselves with countries in the Asia-Pacific area. At the same time, this meeting underlined the possibility of incorporating other countries to the Pacific Alliance. We want to have associate members, and we want to negotiate with them following precisely the type of standards developed during the TPP negotiations. Therefore, New Zealand has already proposed to incorporate itself to this character of associate member. Australia is in the same type of proposition. Now, at the same time, the Pacific Alliance is oriented towards a better and more substantial integration in Latin America, and therefore we have established a working relationship with Mercosur. We understand that Mercosur and the Pacific Alliance are different not because simply of ideological concepts or visions of protectionism or openness. They are different because the economies are different, and the way in which the Brazilian economy developed and the way in which the Argentinian economy developed necessitates an enormous amount of work in order to incorporate these countries or to make these countries converge with the way in which our economies have developed. This is an important effort, and let me underline what I'm going to say now. It is extremely satisfactory to us that now we have in these countries governments that appreciate the possibility of converging with open economies that want to be open to the world. And this is an important factor if we want to consider the possibilities of integration in the region. Therefore, yes, we are extremely active. We are going to participate in a meeting in Hanoi in May, in which the Asian countries will discuss TPP. As you know, Japan has proposed to continue with the TPP process. We have this idea on the table. I saw yesterday night Prime Minister Trudeau saying that he is also very interested in this idea and he wants to push for it. This has nothing to do with the criticism of the United States government. Let me be clear. We share with the United States government the idea that we need better disciplines and higher standards in world trade. We are going to push for that. We are prepared to revise or to renegotiate our trade agreements, incorporating these elements. We have no problem, but we believe that multilateral trade is extremely important, and these initiatives are extremely valuable to our own development.
Terrific. Thanks very much for that. And Ambassador Gutierrez, Ambassador Valdés just made the point that all four countries have trade agreements with the United States. Last week was an interesting week as it related to NAFTA. We know also that actually only 5% of the trade amongst the four countries, of the four countries' international trade, is actually trade amongst the four countries. Much more of it for each country is with the US. So maybe you could give us some perspective on the interplay between trade with the US, trade in the region, and how you're seeing that.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here and listening what we have to say. I also thank the Milken Institute for calling attention to Latin America. I share Gabriel's view that this is important. Three quick comments. The first one would be, I think, to put in perspective the overall Pacific Alliance is around 15 years ago, when the FTAA was basically declared dead, there was some sort of disarray about what would be integration in Latin America. And there still are perhaps very clear different views about that. And the first point is that these four groups of, these four countries, like-minded, very quickly decided to take the same track with respect to trade and development. As it has been mentioned, it's not only about our own trade relationship and the conception that these four countries have about trade, but it's a convergence of policies and belief on how to develop in general. And I think that's important even more so now, given the recent developments in Latin America. And The fact that during the last Chile meeting there were very interesting discussions with Mercosur and the Pacific Alliance, I think it's noteworthy. To my knowledge, Mercosur actually expressed the interest in reaching towards the Pacific Alliance when maybe 5 years ago there was some sort of, even mild disagreements about what was the intent and the possibility of simply talking about these two, say, sub-regional mechanisms did not exist. So that's important. From a in a broader, perspective, I think it's important that the Pacific Alliance can play a key role in what comes next in Latin America, and I'm a firm believer of that. The second thing is obviously in relation to what just happened with TPP. To many, it was a surprise that TPP has been discarded by the U.S. And nevertheless, I think it's also noteworthy that, again, the Pacific Alliance has taken an active leadership in trying to approach, actually approaching East Asia countries and saying, well, we're ready to engage. And it's unclear about what could be accomplished. It's unclear right now about how fast and how we can advance in that regard. But several of the former TPP countries have expressed interest in at least becoming, as it was mentioned, associate states. And the possibility, therefore, or having this mechanism be a platform to re-engage with former TPP countries is there, and I think that's also relevant. And again, it's not, the United States was invited to that meeting and was present at least at some level at that meeting.
Well,
yes.
No, please continue, I'm sorry.
No, and finally, I mean, I'll talk briefly about Mexico in relation to trade and NAFTA and the Pacific Alliance. Mexico basically has, for Mexico, trade is 70% of GDP. It has evolved from 30% to around 70% of GDP in the last 20, 25 years. We are a country that it's a firm believer that trade is it's a necessary, if not sufficient, conditions for development nowadays. We are deeply committed to continue to strengthen economic trade ties with different regions. And Mexico's geographical position does provide this opportunity to be obviously clearly embedded in the North American, in the NAFTA region, but also being able, as you said, to interact from the trade point of view with other countries in Latin America.
Well, it's interesting, actually, we at the IDB did some research around how trade within the region can offset potential protectionist actions by others in the world. And actually, more intra-regional trade reduces the impact of any kinds of protectionism by 50%. So it tells you that all these comments are directly on that path. Ambassador Gutierrez, you said it was a necessary but not sufficient condition for development. And I think that's a really important piece of this, which is if you asked any South Korean, what was it that allowed them to move in one generation to a developed country, a high-income country, they would say three things: education, education, and education. And in fact, if Latin America's students had performed as well as the students in the OECD countries over the last 40 years, GDP in each of these countries would be 50% higher than it is today. So how do you see the Pacific Alliance building toward some of the softer things that create growth? Because at the end of the day, all of this is about more economic growth, more wealth and wellness for the citizens of each of the countries. How central a role do things like education and innovation play in the agenda, and how do each of you see that? I can start at either end.
Okay, I'll venture some comments. And again, trying to reflect upon Mexico's own example. Mexico has done a series of structural reforms, not only on trade, but on different fronts: deregulation, divestiture of private enterprises, and more recently, during the President Peña Nieto administration, labor, education, science, the judicial reform. So the question about how to increase growth right now is on everybody's mind. And the concern about employment is on everybody's mind right now. It's difficult to, the problem is that, in my view, people are attributing to trade too much, but at the same time blaming trade for things that are not to blame. That is why I think it's important to say we need it, we need that free trade, but it's not sufficient. With respect to the alliance, there is a lot of exchange of experiences and best practices among these 4 countries that allow us to learn from each other on different sectors, whether it's education, health, and I think that's part of the policy convergence that we were earlier talking about.
Terrific. Please,
Yeah.
Ambassador Valdés.
Go ahead.
Well, I perfectly agree with what the ambassador of Mexico has just said. Chile has also invested a lot in an educational reform recently, which, as all educational reforms, is extremely debated and polemic. But it is clear that the objective is to make of our country a more competitive country. That's the main objective. And to give our children a better education. Now, this is a first point in which meetings of the Pacific Alliance have insisted, in which we have exchanged views and cooperation, and in which we are trying to create an exchange of students which will change probably the logic of Latin America, in which Latin Americans leave the continent in order to study abroad. The possibilities of our people, our young people, to live in different countries of the region is an extremely interesting way of looking at it. The second thing is innovation and small and medium enterprises. This has been a mandate to presidents and to ministers in the Pacific Alliance to work on fostering and promoting the work of small and medium enterprises. And in our, as you know, the United States is an observer of the Pacific Alliance. In our plans of work with the United States, the plan of working together on this issue, small and medium enterprises and innovation, is the main axis of our work. Therefore, this is the main cooperation we would receive from the US as an associate member. Therefore, I think the question is extremely relevant, and I think we are fully aware of the importance of this topic.
And so how, just to follow up on that, if any of you want to comment, how are you thinking about making or creating an environment where small and medium-sized enterprises really can benefit from trade and from integration and make themselves more competitive?
Yes. Well, I agree with my colleagues. You know, it is very important to have these medium and small enterprises come into the market. In Peru, we suffer a problem of informality. You know, there's many small enterprises, but they are in the informal market. That means that the people that are hired there have no security, no health insurance. The enterprise doesn't pay any taxes, so therefore it also cannot have any loans from the formal banks, and maybe they get loans much higher from the informal lenders. So our government, Mr. Kuczynski, has and they have approved some laws recently, you know, trying to deregulate, you know, deregulation in order to make small enterprises formalize themselves in 2-3 weeks, because before it took about 6-9 months, a lot of expenses, a lot of money you had to pay for different instances. So that is very important. We want to formalize the market. We want the people to get integrated into the system. and this means that what we have achieved, not only Peru, but I think all our countries, is to grow. The middle class has grown, and that is very important. Not because they get better education and better access to the system, but also because they, as they belong to the middle class, they maintain the economic system, the policies, and therefore there are many not so subject to some populist ideas that are running around in the continent and elsewhere in other continents as well. So it is very important to change the mentality of the people and make them be in the formal market to understand that having their small enterprise, meeting with friends and making their a small enterprise, but in the formalized market, is very important. So that is one of the objectives of the Peruvian government, and I think that will also help our country fellows of the Alliance Pacific.
Right, and then being able to be included in a formal way in value chains across the 4 countries. Juan Carlos.
Yeah, I was, thinking a little bit about the following, and at the same time trying to be a little bit of critic as well, because we're talking about the positives, which is great, but also we need to see a little bit of the challenges. I believe at the end, any country, and any nation is trying to set different set of policies to enhance development, but at the end prosperity of its people, and that's the whole set of ideas. Then when we think about Pacific Alliance, is a tool that will enhance our countries. It's not, the total solution for a problem. We're not talking here about, the latest, medicine to solve our problems. But we have here an opportunity for enhancement of the things we do. So, several things. On the Pacific Alliance, intra-trade, we have not been very successful. Maybe we don't need to be so successful, but we have a big potential. The value chains. You mentioned some examples. Some of our countries have a lot of trade agreements, but let's use Chile as an example. They have trade agreements with everybody. So it creates a big opportunity for countries like Colombia that can produce a lot of raw materials or processed materials and be included into the value chains of final products that can go to certain Asian countries. That's one way of saying things. We gotta think a little bit deeper. Which are this? Because it sounds very, very interesting. It sounds very obvious, by the way. It is happening, but we might have a deeper potential into that. And we will need to do some efforts in the years to come. On education, I am very much convinced that we need all of our countries to keep sending as many kids as we can to the best schools in the world, so our schools can raise its level. And this set of agreements that we have had, there are already something like 1,500 scholarships already provided. And those scholarships have benefited equally almost every country, 400, 500 per country. And each country has offered mainly the same kind of benefits. I see it wonderful for integration. I see it wonderful for cultural benefit, for the idea of getting together. But also, we need to not to forget that we need to still get the best we can from American schools, European schools, schools from Asia, and keep raising our level so that happens. On innovation, I think there's an effort actually in which I think you have been very much involved, yes, of creating these angel fund and these, I would say, SMEs fund to try to, out of those funds, really make some of these SMEs to prosper, and really contribute on the entrepreneurship among the region. When we think about value chains, I think those SMEs is where they might have an opportunity. If we can create some of those, thinking on how to be integrated from the beginning to this network that we might have along the Pacific Alliance. That's a little bit of the opportunity there. And on innovation, I will add the same. I think it's great to work together for innovation, but actually being here today in Milken Institute, innovation is happening all around here, you know, it's everywhere. So we have to continue to be connected. Some of these agreements or some of these initiatives in the past, certainly is not the case of Pacific Alliance, try to reinvent technology and try to replace even imports from everywhere. I think we can do here, actually the country is a little bit benefiting from knowledge and exposure for other countries to other parts. I will end this part just by saying I am very much convinced that Pacific Alliance has a wonderful opportunity because of the agility of harmonization we have. But I think we're getting into the time that we might need to take advantage of it and be a little bit faster. Maybe I am too much action-oriented, but I believe, you know, we need to make some of these great ideas that we have evaluated, that the experts are seeing, that our governments are already talking. Everything has been discussed already into the field of action and results. I think that's important.
That's a really good point, because we've got areas, you know, I think one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Pacific Alliance has been the way that the private sector has been involved in setting the agenda. But I think you're also seeing, because actually I don't think there's anything that's too action-oriented, you're seeing a little bit, I think, of frustration among some of the members of the private sector in that certain areas are not moving faster. So you've got labor integration issues that have not moved all that quickly. You've got the integration of the stock markets, which is there in form, but in practice, not much happening, right? And it goes to this question of harmonization. There are areas of harmonization that really have to move for the next big steps. So, you know, what are your thoughts on what's holding it back? What can be done to push through those barriers to really finish unleashing some of that potential?
Well, again, going to my first comments, I think something that's going to help move things faster is, again, what has happened with TPP. The fact that creates a scenario where our countries are going to be much more interested in moving forward in harmonization and to determine what we actually going to do as a bloc with East Asian Pacific countries. I think that will be helpful. The second thing is, yes, there might be certain frustration on the private sector about it's actually quite a flexible mechanism if you think about it, and it's fairly new also. Again, if you put things in perspective, I think that it has advanced pretty quickly. We are at a juncture, I think, in which the Pacific Alliance is going to soon be forced to decide whether it's going to become a stronger mechanism geopolitically and whether it will also try to do something serious with respect to the Asia-Pacific region. I think that's pretty much where we are right now, and I would expect that in the next 12 months or so, as the presidents meet again, which is, as you know, the major decision body, those things would be, I think, would be decided.
Please.
Well, I fully agree with what has just been said, and my impression is that the word geopolitical comes here in a very perfect way. It is true that for some time you have to remember that the adherence to free trade in Latin America is a phenomenon that happened in our countries in the South after the end of the dictatorships, and in Mexico with the complete transformation that NAFTA meant. It is not an old phenomenon, but at the same time it has already 30 years, more or less. And this is a complete transformation in the way in which we have seen our own economies and the way in which we incorporate our themselves in the world. A second factor has been the appearance of China as a central issue in our development. China is the best or most important client of China is the most important client for Chilean products, agricultural products. And we have become important providers of China in fruits, for instance. Some countries have received an important part of Chinese investments in Latin America. Therefore, we are seeing ourselves in a situation in which we belong to the Western world. We are part of countries. We are part of the best associates of the United States. We are close to the U.S. We want to be close to the U.S. We want to follow. We want to continue to receive U.S. investments, but at the same time, it is clear that the Asia-Pacific area, that we belong fully to the Asia-Pacific area, and what happens in the Asia-Pacific area is critical to us. In that context, the logic of Latin American integration changes. It is not anymore the romantic vision of the past. It is a very concrete and practical thing we have to do in order to be able to resist the tensions that will necessarily happen between these two worlds, and to be able to profit from the opportunities that will come from this general movement in geopolitical terms. Therefore, I think that even if we are looking at very concrete and precise elements in the development of the alliance, I think that all these movements conform a general vision which is being formed among us, and to which is being attracted, let me add, Argentina and Brazil, which did not look at these things in this way, but are now realizing that they have to convene, that the way in which they were looking at their own development was not the best one, and that they have to go towards our own path. Let me say something to finish, which is an anecdote, and which Chileans say half in serious and half laughing, which is a famous phrase that Fernando Henrique Cardoso, the former president of Brazil, said about Chile at a certain moment in which we had a very big fight with our brothers from Mercosur, because we are associate members of Mercosur, and we have had many good moments and bad moments with Mercosur. And Cardoso said at a meeting, we shouldn't fight with Chile. You have to realize that he has a certain conceptual leadership over us that sometime will come to us and we will have to follow. The issue of the conceptual leadership became incorporated into our own Chilean politics. Some people use the concept to laugh about it, some other people to be proud about it, but it has a ring of truth in terms of the way in which our country developed its own ideas about free trade agreements and trade in the area 20 years ago.
So I'm going to turn to Ambassador Pareja, and after that we'll take some questions if anyone in the audience has some, so you can be prepared.
Yes, having heard what has been said till now, I think that also the relationship between Latin America and between the Latin Americans and the APEC countries and the Asian countries has been strengthened by the ABAC, no, the private sector interrelationship, and I think that we in the Pacific Alliance need to strengthen the relationship between entrepreneurs. It's been said, only 5% of our commerce is intra-Alliance Pacific, so that is not much. We need to, maybe due to that, the entrepreneurs have not gotten together that much. We have, for instance, a very, very strong entrepreneurial relationship with Chile, very strong. There's both ways, no? There's a lot of investment from Chile in Peru, and not that much, but also important investment of Peru in Chile. Also with Colombia. I think with Mexico, we need to reinforce that, and maybe the channel could be strengthening the entrepreneurial relationship between our countries, making them get together, be friends, and working not only the intra-regional relationship, but also between the entrepreneurs of the fourth countries. I think that is an aspect that has not been quite strengthened yet.
Well, and hopefully the Angel Investor Fund will contribute to that at the entrepreneurial level. Without a doubt, the Chinese have recognized everything that you said. I mean, it was, I don't know, 1 week or 2 weeks after the election when Xi Jinping came to Latin America and made the comment that there will be a doubling of foreign direct investment over the next 5 to 10 years. The China Development Bank and Exim Bank have lent over $140 billion to the region in the last 7-8 years, more than the World Bank, the CAF, and the IDB put together in recent years. So there's no question that geopolitically, I think countries often fall into that trap where you take your regions for granted who've always been there and been a part of your sphere, which may very well be the case. Why Secretary Mnuchin didn't mention Latin America, right? We get complacent with things that work well sometimes. Questions from the audience. There's a microphone available, so if you just put up your hand, we'll take a question or two. Right here.
Thank you. David Trulio from Lockheed Martin. With all the integration that takes place in the closer economic ties, what do you see as some of the second and third order effects of that? And the focus of my question is, do you see development in security cooperation that follows this economic integration? I look at the ambassadors on this stage and I think of the terrible disasters that have befallen so many of your countries, from fires to mudslides and horrible events. Could security cooperation be a further outgrowth of this economic integration? Thank you.
Great. Does anyone want to take a quick stab at that?
I think there is a lot. I think there is a lot of cooperation. There is a lot of cooperation, and we are recognized as countries that are prone to catastrophes, natural catastrophes. To just give you an example, we live in the middle of a very convulsive world in our countries. Valparaiso had 400 small and big earthquakes during the last 3 days. The possibility of a big earthquake is there. We had the fires some time ago. I was looking at the inundaciones, how do you say that? Floods in Peru some weeks ago.
Terrible.
Terrible things. And in that sense, I believe that there is a lot of cooperation between our expert sectors of experts, also among our armed forces, which cooperate not only in that. We have had the honor and the possibility of cooperating with the peace process in Colombia, which has been for us a very important thing, the most important thing in the region in a long time. Therefore, yes, we are extremely linked, and I believe that the participation of the Mexican firemen in supporting us during the fires in January was received an immense national applause, for instance.
Just to echo, I think there's in terms of security, there's a lot of going. Even before the Pacific Alliance formally became active, security cooperation among our countries has been fairly strong over, at least in the past 10 years. Whether fighting organized crime, addressing other type of threats, I think it's there. And disaster relief, it's an area, now that you bring it, that I don't think, there's a lot that also is going on among our countries, but I think it's one of the areas, if you think about what could serve, in my view, as an area where Latin American countries can actually use to integrate or to have some form of common track, it's actually disaster relief. It's one of the areas that it's very generous, it's noble, it's not usually very conflictive, and yet all of our countries are suffering from that. And I think that's something that we should probably strengthen. No?
What I would comment on to that is, has been said, in terms of security, there is a lot of cooperation. For Colombia specifically, of course, there is a major effort in Central America, the Caribbean, and support of many other countries in the region, just sharing lessons is what I would describe, but it has resulted in a permanent flow of training and meetings, security coordination, efforts, etc. Some industry coordination as well. You know, I have to tell that some efforts have been done and were done that have resulted in specific projects like, you know, Colombia and Brazil building certain kind of riverine vessels or well, other kind of initiatives on that front. But since we're speaking on Pacific Alliance today, I have to say that as much as we have created this set of interesting elements, there has not been yet a specific Pacific Alliance security meeting, you know. And I expect when my two colleagues refer to the logic of geopolitical perspective among the Pacific Alliance, that could be a future step. I think that has not been done, honestly, to avoid any kind of misinterpretation from other countries in the region. So we have continued to make this interesting and, I would say, growing security cooperation on every front, from, as was said very, very well, confronting organized crime to doing all kinds of humanitarian capabilities. But in the years to come, I believe that's an interesting element. Although I have to confess that all my previous life as Minister of Defense for Colombia, an interesting experience was to travel to Hawaii for an exercise, a naval exercise that is done every year. What is the name? RIMPAC, yeah. And there was an interesting coincidence. The only 4 Latin American navies that were taking part in that exercise were the 4 Pacific Alliance navies, without coordinating or saying, this is what we're going to do. It happens because we kind of do and follow the same pattern. And it was very interesting to me to see the Navy, the Chilean Navy being the deputy commander of that exercise. So it was an interesting opportunity, just as an anecdote.
I'll just add on the disaster recovery piece just for a second, which is that the 4 countries, without necessarily a formal framework for doing it, in the recent Peruvian floods, have taken the Chilean system for responding to a major natural disaster, housing solutions for Colombia and Mexico, into account while planning the recovery from the natural disaster. Juan Gabriel.
No, I just wanted to add the following. This is the 3rd time, in my experience, that the ambassadors of these 4 countries go together. We were in Texas some 2 years ago. We were then in Utah, and now here. This is extraordinary because I don't think that in the past you would have found 4 ambassadors of Latin America going together and expressing the same vision of the way in which we would like to link ourselves to the US and to the world. I just wanted to say that because some people might think that this is very common. This is very uncommon.
And you'd see the 4 finance ministers in different fora.
That's right.
Coming together similarly, and I think that's a very good point.
Yes.
And one speaking for 4 in some of those fora, which is also a very unique thing that is now beginning to feel not so different. Another question.
Very quick, first of all, 26th of May, there will be a global platform for disaster risk reduction in Cancun, and there will be also a meeting of the 4 countries of the Pacific Alliance. This is part of the UN ISDR. And the second one, in 4 minutes, it's impossible to talk about, but it's important, I think, talking about tourism, also about the soft culture that it's behind everything, like food. And finally, investments. Mexico is the second investor in Peru, the third investor, fourth investor in Colombia, also very important investor in Chile.
So give us a question.
No, it's only
No,
for the
just
next
a comment.
Yeah, it's a comment.
Okay.
The question is, if you want, what are you doing with investments?
But he mentions the word investment, and I cannot not fall
Can't let
into
it
that. I strongly believe, and probably this is a more perspective from my own country, that when you think about prosperity to the future, when you think about taking advantage of this framework that we have created here, the opportunities that free trade agreements are around, is very much based and required to make the investment climate as attractive as possible to investors from anywhere. Of course, from the Alliance, of course, from the United States. I really care for that. But of course, from Asia and Europe and everywhere. And we need to be very sure, in a time in which every country is doing the same, every set of countries is trying to do the same, that we really keep the competitive edge on fundamental, elements like, of course, the macroeconomic environment, the infrastructure, the labor market conditions for that. That includes, of course, education. But no doubt, and I think it's an issue that is becoming more interesting everywhere. Maybe I'm speaking a bit from Colombia, the importance of having a very strong judicial system that gives all the guarantees for investors to stay and stay long term. But on the education side and labor side, I think it's another front that we need to focus probably as a region, because let's face it, this big debate about free trade versus fair trade is very much related to technology and skills of workers to be able to work in that new environment. And we need to think about it.
Absolutely right. Well, I think that the sign is saying that we need to wrap up the session. I apologize for any questions that we weren't able to take. I'm sure there'll be a couple minutes afterwards. Let's please thank the ambassadors for joining us here today.